Hi, I'm John Mancini on behalf of Content Results and on behalf of AIIM. I'd like to welcome you to this briefing for our State of the Industry report for 2021. Before we get started, I'd like to thank some of the participants. First of all, our CIP expert panel. You'll see their names listed right here. And Jed and Jeff and Laura and Jessica and Alan were incredibly helpful in coming up with some of the recommendations that I'll go through, and I really do appreciate their engagement and involvement in this project and their willingness to share their expertise. And also thank you so much to our underwriters. You can see the list here. I would urge you to check out these companies, check out their offerings. By being involved in this project, they're demonstrating their commitment to the industry, and we do appreciate their involvement. So there's a context for this year's report that I think is important to understand. There's actually two contexts. The first is a well-documented one that we've talked about for a number of years, which is this rising tide of information chaos based on incredibly rapidly increasing volumes and varieties of information. And we've documented that. We've talked about that for the past couple of years. But there was a new element this year, which was what was going on with COVID and the increase in chaos associated with remote-based work and the impact that COVID had on that. As you can see from the chart, only a third of organizations thought they were prepared for this. And so it's that combination of the ongoing chaos plus all sorts of unexpected things for 2020 ramping into 2021 that represent the context for this report. So there's four key conclusions looking at the data that we wanted to go through today, along with some recommendations for action for you in terms of thinking about that data. The first is that when it comes to thinking about business technology alignment, and this is always a problem area for many organizations, but people were particularly tough on this, I think, this year, probably reflecting some of the unusual circumstances of 2020. And so when you ask what to do about this, some of the advices that the expert panel had were, first of all, under duress, organizations had to embrace flexibility this past year. Well, don't lose that moving forward. Keep that flexibility in place as you think about where you go next. It's not going to be what the past year was like, but it's also not going to be what the year before that was like. And so embrace that flexibility. Elevate all of your conversations about information value. We may think that we've said that for a long time, but people still haven't quite digested it. Create a predictable framework in your organization for thinking about issues like risk and value, rather than coming up with them from scratch for every information-based project you conduct. Create that framework so that it starts to become a shared understanding in your organization. Make sure that when it comes to transformation, that somebody at the C-level is accountable. And then also try to get the business as much as possible to drive this alignment question. It's easy to hand this off to IT and blame them. IT is a tool to facilitate the business. It's not the other way around. And so make sure that the business is tasked to lead this question of alignment. Second core conclusion, looking at the report, is that organizations are struggling. They're struggling with this question of how do they deal with information chaos. And you can see this basically in a C- grade that they give themselves for their effectiveness at dealing with the tide of chaos. And so as you think about this and think about what to do about it, start by focusing on the life cycle of information. That's a really important concept in terms of thinking about questions of risk and value as well, because a lot of it's dependent on where you are in the life cycle of that information. Start to make the question of information chaos visible in your organization, because you won't have a chance of controlling it if it isn't something that the organization can see and see the impact of. Pick a place to start. I've seen so many organizations just ruminate on this for cycle after cycle after cycle. Pick a place, start, engage the business, and get moving. Third major conclusion in the report focuses on what I would consider to be underinvestment by many organizations in core AIIM competencies. You can see this on the slide in terms of the grades that participants give in terms of their overall competence relative to the four key AIIM competencies. And when you think about what to do about this, there were a couple of recommendations from the expert panel. First of all, the first two are really tied together, which is, you want to look at innovative technologies, but you also want to do so through a realistic prism of what it is you're trying to accomplish rather than get fascinated with the technologies themselves. That ties to the third one, which is that you also want to piggyback some of these initiatives on existing investments. Nobody's going to wake up and think that they want AIIM just because they want AIIM. They're going to think about it because it facilitates some business result that they're trying to achieve. And so build successes with the more innovative technologies that occur on the edges of the AIIM space, and don't neglect them. So things like machine learning and artificial intelligence and RPA, and even if you're not ready to deploy these technologies at scale, start tinkering with them and start understanding what they're all about. Don't waste the crisis that was generated by COVID and this emphasis on remote learning and remote working and the emphasis on the role that information plays in making that a good experience. Push it and make sure that you don't waste a good crisis. And then lastly, as you deploy new technologies and new competencies, don't assume that the old ones are just going to go away on their own. You have to consciously think about that question of migration and conversion and what are you going to do about what you already have. The last thing we wanted to talk about is this question of, what are the keys to successful digital transformation? What are the keys to becoming a truly digital organization? And as you might guess, it doesn't really focus so much on the technology itself. It focuses on things like money and focus and culture, and organizational alignment is really a key part of that. And so when you think about this, what can you do about it? How can you help your organization? A lot of this has to do with change management. Understand that it's not just for frontline workers. Create a dedicated unit to address it. Communicate in a way that addresses not only the how, but is really clear about why. And when you talk to the C-level, don't be abstract in terms of the kind of support that's needed for change management. Sometimes we think that the C-level should be mind readers. Sometimes I think they are mind readers, but you really need to be explicit about that support and invest in the kind of storytelling that makes projects real for people. Every organization does marketing. They don't often take marketing skills and apply them to the deployment of technology projects. And lastly, deploy this stuff in a way that is digestible for people. Do it by the drink, not out of a fire hose. The last thing, and this should be a country song, I think, or something. I asked the CIP panel, what do you know now that you wish you knew then? And here's what they came up with, and they're kind of interesting to think about. The first one is understand that we're in the disruption business. A lot of the technologies that we deal with have been around for a while, and so we tend to think about them maybe not being as disruptive as some other technologies. But at the core, the stuff that we do has to do with the way people work, the context in which they work, how they work, the processes in which they work. And so that's a disruptive thing, and don't underestimate that when you start talking about projects. Think strategically about the pace of change and how change occurs in your organization, because the pace is going to change depending on the nature of the business, the country that you're in, the industry that you're in. All that stuff affects how quickly you can change. And so as you go about change, deploy projects that will tell you something about where you are trying to go next. And that means that you're going to have a fairly thick skin for failure, because you want to fail. Failure tells you what you shouldn't do and kind of gives you a guide map to where you should go next. But if you're going to fail fast and fail really fast. Fourth thing they wished is that they had spent more time thinking about engaging users where they live, not in some abstract AIIM world, but in the processes and responsibilities that they have. The folks also told us that they wished they had done a better job of honing their arguments. And if you want to think about it this way, think about it like a C-suite elevator pitch. When somebody comes and asks you, why is information management, content management, information governance, records management, why is it important? Imagine that you're standing there with the CEO and you want to tell him or her what what it is that you do. Make sure you got that argument down. And lastly, don't underestimate the power of a seat at the table, particularly for folks in the governance and records arena. You got to be at the table in order to head off things that you're going to have to clean up later on. And so again, thank you so much to the CIP panel, to our underwriters for being engaged in this project. It was really a fun project to do, and I think there's a lot of interesting things going on in the space right now. And I would urge you to get a copy of the report, take a look at it, think about the recommendations, and then try to figure out where you go next. Thank you for your time. This is John Mancini from Content Results.